Awesome. Hey, everybody. Okay, all right. I don't know the way, you guys may have known me or not. I feed off of energy. I'm an extrovert, so if you guys are kind of down in the dumps, then I'm going to moderate this panel down in the dumps. So we're going to try this one more time. How's everybody doing? Yeah, there we go. My name is Erin Everhart, so I've joined the MediaPost team just about a month ago. Super excited to be here. Before we do quick panel introductions, can we just take a moment and appreciate Mandy's pants for all of my females in the crowd? Did she not slay the presentation and the entire outfit? So I'm just super, I don't know where she is. Outside, but Mandy, your pants were great. All right, so you guys can introduce yourselves much better than I can, so let's do some quick intros and we'll get down into questions.
Dennis Maxwell with Zenni Optical. We're the largest direct-to-consumer glasses brand. I lead all of our in-house digital marketing teams. Really proud that this year we won the U.S. Search Award for Best In-House PPC Team and Ad Exchangers Award for Best In-House Media Operations.
I'm Clayton, McLaughlin, 18 years in the ad agency world, and most recently started my own independent consulting group.
Schmitz, Senior Director of Digital Marketing at NBC Sports Next and Fandango Media. I lead a team of 30 digital marketers across a bunch of B2B and B2C e-commerce brands within the NBC Universal.
Hi, I'm Salil, and I'm a marketing technology manager at Uber.
Salil, straight to the point. I love it.
Said short.
We did say short. I mean, we want to get to the meat of the presentation. So let's dive in. During the prep call, we talked a lot about AI and how these new technologies are really allowing us to take back control of our campaigns from Google. Clayton, I think that was actually one of your first things you said when we prepped. So let's kick us off. Like, what are the things that you're doing now to take back control of your campaign ownership from Google?
It's tough. I mean, we always recommended doing as little PMax as you can, just in the sense of you give up control. And so you have to make sure that you're intelligent about what you're giving up that around. We look, and I know we'll talk more about it, but I've done a lot of retail in the last several years of my career, and we focused a lot on the shopping piece and what can we do within Google Shopping and Bing Shopping for that matter, to be able to optimize for that, because that's even less control. But if you can control the feed and the way that that works, and we were focusing a lot on the shopping element of those pieces. And then, of course, anything that's sort of the post-click experience, like what does that mean, the value that it has in the front end, and then obviously the UX and just the general consumer experience in the back end as well.
I think control is a very strong word, and I would almost say that it's more about realigning what we are doing on the platforms with what our business goals are. So at least that's the approach we have taken. I completely agree with what Clayton just mentioned, that you have to question it and sometimes test a lot to figure out where things might work for you. But I think that's how we are approaching it.
Yeah, and we have specific examples where we do as much as we can for control, like on the Fandango side, which sells movie tickets. We have a feed into the Google One box, but still don't feel like we have control because things can change there on such a whim in terms of how much traffic they're driving and how much are coming back to us. So even when we feel like we have some control, we don't necessarily feel like we do. So yeah, it's about diversifying as much as we can and trying to slide some of those dollars to other places.
Yeah, and I actually don't think taking back control is necessarily the approach that we take. We try to test into every single aspect of any AI or new technology that ad platforms put out, sometimes even third-party AI tools we've had a little less success on. But it's constantly testing, and how do we become early adopters of something to beat out the competition, but understanding what we can control and what levers we still have within that platform. So like PMax, for example, in our call before this, we talked a lot about feed optimization. It's something that I feel really strongly about. It's one of the levers that we still have and can make a huge impact in PMax performance, and something that should be a good amount of time should be spent on.
So PMax has come up twice now in the last 2.5 minutes, right? So let's just go ahead and address the elephant in the room. Successes, failures that you've seen from it, are we happy with it?
Yeah, I think it's tough to compare it apples to apples because it includes brand search. So Google pushes, hey, use your same goals as non-brand. We want to push all this investment through here, but it's not non-brand search. If you look at the search queries, which we can see now in PMax, a lot of it is branded search. And so but with that being said, it is the future, and Google's made it really clear, like, this is what you have to use. So it's trying to identify, how do we adjust our goals, what percentage is coming in through brand, how do we best run these campaigns? And yeah, it has been successful. We have been not the earliest adopters of that. We use Search Ads 360, and that made some, it made it a little slower for us to get onto PMax, but now we're fully on it.
We found success in our newer brands testing within PMax. For our more established brands, we ended kind of pulling back. But for new brands testing, we like it because we can just throw it out there and kind of see where we should turn around and put a little bit more energy. But again, we've seen kind of the opposite on some of our more established brands.
Why do you think that's the case?
I don't know. I mean, I would like to think it's because we know what we're doing with those established brands, right? Like, we know what's worked and we've figured it out over the years. But maybe it's also that we're not giving it as much latitude as we would with some of those newer brands, right? If we feel like we know this is what's going to work or this is what's going to drive when we're beholden to a number for our lead gen, you know, we're a lot more open with those more nascent brands that we're like, sure, let's throw some money and see what happens. We're more open-minded.
Nothing to lose, almost.
I think it's been a mixed bag for us, and I say that because we observe different outcomes in different markets. What I found is that where your business is pretty stable and you don't see a lot of volatility, PMax can prove incremental. So it can add to what you're doing on search and display and so on. But again, a lot of it has got to do with testing. And eventually, I believe Google will have a product which allows you to do incrementality testing with PMax. So I think that should be the monumental shift that we hope will get us more clarity on where PMax can drive results for us.
Yeah, and I would say that incrementality testing is a great way to identify the value of it. Currently, we actually launched a PMax incrementality test beginning of this week on Monday. It's something we've tested once before with kind of mixed results, and something that we're currently testing.
How are you testing the incrementality? Is it just through holdout methods or?
Yep, geo holdout. We're holding out about 14% of the states we're advertising in.
And you have seen a rise in the, we don't have to name specifics by all means, but you have seen a lift in the overall incrementality using that?
Yeah, definitely there's a lift.
So we focused on Google's Performance Max. Has anyone done anything with Microsoft yet? Wow.
We are trying to set, I thought we'd maybe be live, but we're not live yet. But we're trying to set it up here in December still.
Nice. Is it on anyone's horizon to test with Microsoft?
I think for us, eventually, we want to test it. It's something that, in general, shopping performs more poorly on Bing than Google for us, so it's something that we invest a much smaller fraction of our budget in.
I'm glad they're calling it Performance Max. You know, it makes it easy, I think, otherwise.
It's one thing they can finally agree on, right?
Well, it's not like they haven't just taken the entire structure. And I mean, the smartest thing they ever did was when you could just literally download Google and drop it into Bing, and things were great. Right?
Yeah, so it makes it really easy for you.
Yeah, it was much easier. Yeah. Good old.
So you guys are managing large-scale search campaigns, right? And Salil, with Uber, I think you guys focus on Uber Eats specifically. How are you thinking about AI to help manage the scale and the complexity of all the different campaigns you're using? Where have you seen it prove most successful and efficient?
So I still think that we are in the early stages and we're exploring where we can find value. There are two areas that come to mind for us. One is creative testing. So just being more agile with the variations that we're able to create more rapidly and test them out, especially with text assets. So the platforms have products which you can use right now. For example, Google has got something called automatically created assets, where based on your existing copy, it can come up with new variations. So that's one way to look at it. The second is mainly in terms of intelligence around performance fluctuations. And being a marketplace, I think that's really, really important to us because very often we'll have situations where we are supply constrained and we still have the demand, and how do we cope with that? So I think those are the two areas that at Uber we are exploring, but you know, there's a lot that we need to do there to kind of get to a stage where we feel mature and we feel happy about it.
Yeah, and I would say that we haven't given Google quite as much control with the creative aspect of it. We've tested some third-party creative AI solutions that have kind of been at parity, but we've decided not to move forward with them more recently. So bidding is the biggest thing. Bidding, and then like within Google and Bing, RSAs are definitely beneficial. And then we do use, like I mentioned, Search Ads 360. We've tried some other third-party things, but we like Search Ads just because of the auction time bidding aspect within Google, which I don't think many other platforms have. And then Microsoft soon.
Yeah, we're all in on any sort of AI we can find. Like, one of our biggest objectives here for Q4 and early into next year is figuring out all the different ways we can utilize it. Probably early on, our biggest has been on just operations, marketing operations. Like, how do we save our team time and energy on the little things that they're doing here and there, kind of outside the platforms. But I don't know about the rest of you, but I have not been to a conference or summit this year that hasn't been focused around AI, right? And here's the latest and greatest in every company, and here's what their version of it looks like. So I think we have to get ahead of that curve, and so that's one of our main focal points coming in.
I think of AI in sort of three categories. There's predictive modeling, which is less about how you're actually doing the activation of the media, but more about understanding the impact and what if I did this, what if I did that, what will happen here. Then there's the generative piece of that, so that's the content creation and those sort of pieces, which I think is probably the lowest barrier of entry for most of us to get into, and has frankly been around for quite a long time. And then there's the third I call automation, which I trademarked in 2013, thanks to Kenshu. But just, and this is one that, again, we've been using forever, but it's how do we continue to lay the guardrails around what we're trying to create? So whether you're using PMax or using another automated bid solution, whatever it might be, that you're correctly creating those business-minded outcomes and guardrails around what you're using it for. So I think those are the three like immediate use cases. But the pace that AI is growing, and we'll probably find 6 more by next week at this point. Like, I mean, Google announced their big thing yesterday, Gemini and those pieces, and so like it's just every single week it feels like something new is coming. Amazon did something a couple weeks ago with what they're doing, and so it feels a little bit like the early days of search, where it's like, Jesus, how do I keep up with this? Like, there's just so much going on. It's really exciting, but figuring out how to get that into your day-to-day workflow is the interesting part, and that's going to be so, I think, individually unique too.
So maybe next year Chat GPT will moderate this panel?
I mean, it kind of did already, didn't it? Like, to start it?
That's true.
I'd be an interesting thing to do, yeah.
Are any of you guys worried that AI is going to take over your jobs?
I don't think so. I think that the people who are going to lose their jobs are the people that don't know how to utilize AI to make themselves more productive. So I feel like in marketing, we have in digital marketing, we have an advantage over a lot of other industries because we've been using AI for like 5-6 years, most everyone. And so, people have learned how to incorporate it and become much more productive utilizing it. And now, beyond just like what platforms give us in their form of AI, like Clayton mentioned, there's all kinds of different AI solutions that can help make us more efficient and effective at our roles.
I think it's got to be a compliment, right? The search nerds in the room, do you remember like the first time you figured out how to use a concatenation formula in Excel?
Oh, man.
Right? Like, it feels a little bit like where we're at now. We're like, holy shit, that just saved me like 60 hours. That was amazing. And and I think in the scenarios that I've used AI, within search, but then, I mean, just in general, like in your normal workflows, I mean, I became a coder all of a sudden with ChatGPT. Like, I've got Google scripts that I was never gonna be able to write myself for very simple things, but things that, I mean, if you can automate these normal things and you don't have to go get a third-party tool to do them, like that power, I think it's about efficiency.
Yeah.
With it comes great responsibility, right, Clayton?
Spider-Man,
That's
yes.
right. I mean, it's a buzzword, no doubt, but it's been around for a long time. I mean, think of Pandora, right? It's been doing what it's been doing for 15 plus years. That's AI. All the other things we use day in and day out. So, we just presented back to our rest of our marketing team a couple months ago, basically trying to pull back the curtain on AI. Like, it's not something we're worried about. This is something we're going to lean in as a team and utilize it and make it part of our day-to-day, not worried that it's going to take over what we're trying to do.
I think it's going to make my job more interesting and all our jobs more interesting, more fun. There's no limit to what we can do with it. So I'm not concerned about losing it. I think I'm just looking forward to the evolution that eventually is going to come.
I mean, as a digital marketer, I like the fast-paced environment we all work in. Like, if it was stale, that wouldn't be any fun. So the fact that we have something like this that is pushing us to continue to think and go above and beyond, great.
Yeah, the complement versus takeover is a really good way to think about it. And at the end of the day, the prompts have to come from a human, right? So however good the AI is going to be, it's based upon how good are the prompts that you're giving it to it, right?
Yeah, and I think with marketing, you know, the prompts, but the data that we provide back, and that's becoming more and more important. Like, if AI is doing all of our bidding, what's the data they're bidding towards? How accurate is that data? Is it the right metric that we're passing to them?
Yeah, shit in, shit out. It's that simple, right? No, but it is. I mean, and you
Well summarized.
Well, I mean, you told me to be short. But it's, I don't even know where I was going with that one other than just to cuss on stage, I think, at this point.
Well, we talked a little bit about AI for content, right? And I love this. How do you guys feel about AI creating your content, creating your copy? Is it really better than an actual designer using those assets or a copywriter writing the ads? Can you prove that AI-generated content is better than... Do we have any copywriters in the house? Because I'm going to be apologetic all of a sudden over here. Oh, we have 2 copywriters in the house.
Yeah, for us, we have AI writing some content, but we have a human that's editing it. So I think there'll always be an aspect of that. And then we've worked with some AI solutions for image creation, and it takes training. So like the first week, we get back models with glasses on them. They look horrible. 8 weeks in, they look a little more realistic, like, hey, we could probably use this on our site. And so right now, I would say that there's not like one answer, yes, better or not better. But with the speed that things are changing right now, I assume that it will be as good, if not better, very shortly.
I mean, I think if you asked a room full of creatives, they'd give you a totally different answer. But I specifically went to our VP of creative and partnered with her to make sure that her team was comfortable with this. And I think it's a solid option for scalability, not necessarily initial creation, because we still need that human touch there. But once we have established creative and we want to build upon that or test or version, and I think, you know, at least in my case, I found that the designers and the copywriters, et cetera, like, they're also okay with taking some of that workload off their place, right? Like, how excited do they get when I'm asking them to come up with some more search terms or some more, like, that's not the things they get excited for either. So, like, sure, have at it. You know, there's still a proofing point at the end where we're running a buy and we're getting creative approval. But just that quick scalability of, hey, kick us out, you know, dozens of versions of this, great.
I haven't seen it to be better, and again, it's very early in my view, but I do find that it's pretty similar to the copy that we already have. So the variations is what perhaps where we might see marginal improvement. On a big scale, yes, it'll matter that we are seeing those marginal improvements.
Yeah, and scale is, I think, the name of the game, but you had mentioned that we still need the ideation at the beginning. I've actually seen creatives use it to build thousands of ideas, too. If you've ever been in, like, a creative brainstorming room, right, you've got 9 creatives, and they're all just spitting stuff onto the wall, and they say yes, 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 yes. If you could take that wall and then quadruple it, right, and then really start to pull the things out, I mean, I think that's a really unique way. It's like, how do we get scale with some creativity that aligns to some level of a brief, which we always have to sort of start with. The other thing I'll say is, as far as testing whether it works better or not, there's actually tools, too, that allow you to be able to ask even before you start the creation piece. So you can say, hey, I'm going to be on social, and I'm selling to this demographic, whatever it might be. What should the elements look like? There's a company that was bought by Shutterstock or one of those kind of iStock, something like that. And they would send you back, here's the color schemes you need to use. You need to have an in situation with the product. You need to have these sort of things. I think the problem with that is if everybody starts to use those, then everything starts to look the same. All right? And then you're going to have, okay, then it's the creatives are like, how do we break out of this? I love the example of deodorant, the Old Spice. Like, you remember those weird-ass commercials they started, like, with the centaurs and stuff? And everybody's like, what the hell is going on? It's because everybody talked about, like, oh, you smell like an Irish Spring. And it's like, great. But, like, that's a centaur. Like, I want to put that on my armpits. And so, but that created such a distinction between all of the other brands that they're, you know, it's branding at its best. But I think if you think of that sort of piece, it's like at some point, if we just, everybody's using the same tools and everything's going to start looking the same. And if you've ever looked at a product results page on Amazon, it's amazing how similar all these things start to look. So how do you break out? And I think that's where the human element is going to be really, really important.
So what are some of the things that you're doing to break out from looking the same, right? How are you zigging when everyone else is zagging?
Well, I think it's understanding what the marketplace does actually look like now too, right? So there's a lot of just research of understanding where are we now, what does my competitive set look like, and then where do I stand within all of those pieces, and do I need to break out yet? Or is it advantageous for us to look like everybody else? In some cases, that might be the case. I mean, if you're a challenger brand and you look a little bit like the leader, you know, there's some, oh, that looks like it is. And then you get in there, it's like, oh, that's $10 cheaper. I'm going to get that one because it looks just like the expensive one, whatever. So, you know, I don't think that changes who we are as marketers and the research and intelligence that we've always been very good at. I think that's going to be a really key part as you think about zigging when everybody else is zagging.
So we are all pretty familiar with using artificial intelligence and technology for keyword bidding, optimizing, keyword suggestions, right? Is content and creative really the best next use case for artificial intelligence, or are there other things that you're thinking about of how tech can make your jobs easier?
So bidding definitely stands out, just where to invest and what to invest, how you value a certain customer that you might have acquired. I think that's where we see a lot of potential to continue leveraging machine learning, because at the scale at which we operate, we see a lot of diversity in our customer base and so on.
I mean, one area where we've found it incredibly helpful this year is more on the SEO side of the house. So even within my team, I fought for years to try to get an SEO manager in-house. Finally was able to get it, and thankfully I found someone that was also very much AI driven in things. And his approach on that level is very much like utilizing AI to create all of our copy and content, because we don't have the resource internally, right? If we're saying, hey, we want this SEO driven blog for this brand, it's like, great, you're number 15 in line, get back there. But we found, and I'll show later, some great success in utilizing that for content building. And so it's one, proving the point of needing this SEO manager and giving us the ability to hopefully continue to build that team. So there's an example of AI actually allowing us to bring on additional headcount for 2024.
I think there's a big opportunity for intelligence and more like near time. You know, data flows are coming in for one thing, but you're talking about the large scale of the budgets that are sitting up here, which I'm not included in. But that scale comes with the complexity of understanding the insights and those sort of pieces, and so the AI can do that. That's something that it's always been very good at, frankly. So I think that's a big piece. And then there's also the intelligence of who your consumer is, and there's things like digital twins and those sort of pieces where it's like, now you don't need to have a focus group. You don't need to do these crazy surveys and incentivize people to answer probably the way you want them to realistically. But you can create these sort of synthetic consumers and utilize that, and a lot of that can be done from public data. Like, you don't have to have some crazy data set to be able to make those really effective.
Yeah, and for us, I think really it's creative right now that we're focusing on, so that's what we're actively testing in new forms of AI, and that's the most important thing for us.
Yeah. So before we open up for audience Q&A, one last question, right? We focused so much on how technology is making your lives easier, more efficient. What is the one thing you're never going to outsource to artificial intelligence?
Budget stuff. I mean, I'll give it a little bit of leeway, but I'm not about ready to hand over the keys to that castle quite yet. So sure, I'll take some recommendations, but that's what makes and breaks your
You mean you
employment.
don't have an infinite amount of budget to spend on your search campaigns?
Or take even this percentage and go do with it what you will. Like, I don't know, maybe it's too much control, but I still need a little bit of oversight into that.
Yeah, I would say the data that we feed into whatever models we're using, that's very important that we have a say in it. And then final call on decisions in a lot of cases that AI makes. So like if they are giving us budget recommendations, it's a human that's saying, okay, that works. Or even, hey, this is what your goal should be based off of all this data. Human looks at it and says, oh, okay, instead of the machine just making every single decision.
I think defining business priorities, I don't think we are there yet. So there's a long way to go before we hand over something like that. And eventually that's going to drive everything else we do. So I think just, echoing what Dennis just mentioned.
Yeah, strategy's big. Earlier I thought personal communication, and then I started to use tools that actually respond with like very simple things in email, and I'm like, yeah, maybe might actually be okay with some of that.
Thank
too.
you for coming.
I hate email, so like it's the bane of my existence. So if I can get that out of my workflow, then I'm in. But yeah, I think just general strategy, and AI is going to have a hard time understanding your business in the way that you need to.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Questions from the audience? Oh, have a couple hands. Yuji?
Hey. Hello? There we go. Yuji Nagaki, Director of SEM, Lending Tree. This is more of a forward-thinking question regarding AI and creative. So right now, I assume that most of us are still making, when we make creatives, especially around search, responsive search ads, you got 15 headlines and 4 descriptions, but it's still limited, right? There's still a limited amount of things that we can add. Do you think, and then duration is probably questionable too, but do you think that we're going to get to a point where we're going to have a unique personal messages for every single person, meaning that we can't just have an ad copy where it's going to hit thousands of people and then try a new thing and hit thousands and thousands of people? Like, are we going to get to the point where AI needs to be like, for you, Dennis, I'm going to say one thing. For Clayton, I'm going to say another thing. For Brand, I'm going to say another thing. Like, are we going to get to that? Like, what are your thoughts?
I think that's really interesting. Due to all the privacy concerns right now and the way the industry is moving with privacy, I feel like it would be very difficult to achieve that outside of like Google, for example, which we're interacting with Google on so many different platforms. Maybe they could get close to doing that, but for the general industry, I feel like likely it's impossible and will become more impossible as no more cookies, much more data privacy concerns. But just a thought, could be wrong.
I think we are partially there. There's a lot of dynamic elements we can layer into a copy. For example, it's not just keyword insertion, but the location you can insert. And if you know it's coming from a certain audience, you can have a copy that pertains to that. But I think just to add to what Dennis said, it's just privacy concerns, and I don't think we'll get to a stage where there's one copy for every individual, even with AI.
The one thing that already drove me nuts about search is like, okay, in display and social, I can use these behaviors, and I can use these demographics, and I can use all of these different elements, and search doesn't give you the power to do all those sort of things, at least not to the level and scale that you can in pretty much every other digital media platform available to us, which always drove me nuts. And then realistically, if there's one ecosystem in the world that even with privacy concerns and those sort of systems that could do that, it's going to be Google. I mean, think about even if they do their cohorts or whatever the hell they end up coming up with, right? And they're understanding where you visit, they're understanding when you're there, why you're there. They know you deterministically. You've given them your information. They know what you're saying in your emails, right? You've opted into all of that stuff as an individual. So I think that it's gonna have to be an AI-driven sort of thing, because that scale and that specification is, trying to do that in Excel. I don't want to do that. I don't think there's anybody in this room that wants to.
Yeah, I think, and I hope we do get there, because we do it in other channels, right? Like if I look at what my team's doing on the email or the CRM, or even the account-based marketing that we already do on B2B, it's very much personalized and segmented, and how do we get down to that individual? So I would say that search is probably behind other channels in that regards, but how do we get there with all the limitations that we have with privacy, et cetera?
Hi, Daniel Park from Live Nation Entertainment. I have a couple questions, actually. I don't know if we have time for them, but so the auto-generated like creatives, whether that's like image-based or ad copy for search, like how do you have the confidence or the the confidence that is going to be brand safe or like brand aligned? And because one of the things that I'm nervous about is like some jerk on Twitter finding a weird ad that is auto generated, and it goes up to an executive.
It doesn't sound like Twitter at all.
It's X, everybody. Let's make sure we're all
And my second question is actually going back to PMax. Do you guys? We're actually one of the advertisers that are probably kicking and screaming not to do PMax, and we've been holding out. Well, part of the reason is because we're still waiting to migrate on SA360, and so we can't do PMax right now. But do you find that it's mostly search, or do you see a lot of like the owned and operated and the display side of things, and on YouTube? And then also, like, how do you guys solve like the potential overlap with like a programmatic team, right? Because if from my understanding, PMax can overlap with like what a pro team is doing on DV. So how do you guys sort of make sure that there's separation of church and state?
Yeah, I feel like there's no way to perfectly address that, and the programmatic team just needs to accept that. One of the things with overlap with like within the Google sphere of things, so we have robust YouTube campaigns, and so we found that we're not serving PMAX a bunch on YouTube or display, and we also have demand gen campaigns running, and so it is mostly search and shopping, but there will always be placements there with how it currently is set up. There's no way to exclude that. I don't see Google changing that. So it is what it is. Hopefully it's managed by the same person, like once you get to some level, and once that person has buy-in, it should be easier.
Well, one thing I'd say about PMAX is, an opinion of one with maybe some slightly insider information is, the reason they have it is to try to get you to use all those other channels, right? They want you driving dollars into YouTube specifically and the other ones. I'm for NBC Universal, I'm part of the Google steering committee, and we had a meeting about a month ago, and it used to be that a lot of our incentives as an org with Google were kind of across the board, right? So we'd get credits and incentives across search or across this or that. 24, it's all YouTube. It's the only thing they'll give us. And they pretty much all but said, like, PMAX is trying to drive more usage to video. It's more profitable for them. That's where they're going. So that's part of it too, right? They're trying to drive you into those other channels, which is why they're forcing your hand a little bit.
I think just going back to your first question about brand safety, we try to start small. It could be one market, one campaign, and we try it out, and mainly with something that you're more familiar with, English language. And if you see the results are good, then you can try to scale it up from there. But it's a legitimate concern, and I think starting small and consistently monitoring it is probably the best way to try and bridge that gap.
Yeah, and it's good advice, and I think the last thing on is the guardrails, right? Like, our job is now less the creation of these pieces and more creating the guardrails and the appropriate goals and those sort of pieces to keep everything restrained in the way that we want it to be, was still getting some level of output from there too. I mean, look, we've done DCO for years in display, right? And we controlled all of the elements, where they ended up and how they were organized and the colors that they came with were, that was what the system did. But we created the guardrails, and I think that's the important piece. But that takes experience, right? If you've ever done prompting with those, you realize that like shitty prompts get shitty results, and so it's the same sort of thing. If you set up bad guardrails, then you're going to get bad results.
Yeah, everything needs a human touch, right? At the end of the day, it's still our butt on the line. If an ad goes out and it's in the wrong place, and they're not going to come to me and say, "Hey, Brant, what did AI do?" Like, no, Brant, what did you do? So you have to have that human connection. You have to still make sure that what's going out there is something that's consistent with your brand.
That's awesome. Thank you guys so much. Quick round of applause for our panel.